Hello, it's Ashley with At Home with Ashley, and I have recently become obsessed with rebinding paperback books. So taking, boring paperback books that you probably love, but the outside is ugly, so you rip off the front and you put a new cover on. But on the inside of the book, I really like the look of vintage books where it has marbled paper, and you can buy the marbled paper, but I was like, I'm just gonna make some because I think that sounds more fun, and then I can do it in my color scheme, make it custom. And I get obsessed by making new things. I like to figure out the process and then see if I can do it. So this is really fun for me. So we're going to try this new craft out. Okay, so how marbling works is you have a tray, you put some water in that's thicker than normal water, and then paint floats on the top. So you're gonna put some paint in, and then you need to mix it up. So I have a stylus for mixing it up, but also I've looked through books, I've decided what I've liked, and the way to get the look I like is you need some combs or rakes. And I found some that you could buy, but I was like, I can make some for free from supplies I have on hand, so I am making my own. To make my marbling rake, what I did was I took the tray that I'm going to use to marble in, and we brought that outside, and I found some trim that we just had on hand. And we cut the trim down into 15-inch pieces. I'm making 3 of the rakes. And the 15-inch is a little bit longer than my tray, but that means it'll sit on top, which I really like that. For the first one, we are marking every inch on the piece of trim, and then my husband's just taking his nail gun and nailing it through on the places he marked. And that's all you have to do to make the rakes. It's pretty simple. We repeated that with a 1/2 inch, and then we're also doing one that's kind of on an angle. So on each plane, the nails are 1 inch apart, and then the other one is staggered over 1/2 inch, but they're still 1 inch apart, and that's going to give more of like a peacock look. So like I said, super easy to make. I will still link some in my description below if you'd rather just buy your own, which is faster for sure. Okay, so next we need to mix the water for the marbling bath. And this is called size. And size isn't just water. Like I said, it needs to be a little bit thicker. And we are mixing this the day before I'm planning on doing my actual marbling, because it's best to mix it and have it sit overnight so it can get really thick. So before I did any of the water mixing, I put some water in my tray because I wanted to see how much water I actually needed, because at first I was thinking, oh, a liter will be fine, but that wasn't enough. 2.5 liters works really great with my tray. And the way I could tell is I put it in, and then I used the rake, and I could see the rake is getting wet as I'm using it. So I know how much I need now. I'm using an empty milk jug to mix the bath sizing. So now that I know how much water I need, I put 2.5 liters of water into the milk jug. It's good to have a funnel for this so you don't get water everywhere. And then I am using my little scale I have. I'm putting a cup on top of it and zeroing out the scale. For every liter of water you're using, you need 5 grams of the methocel. And the methocel is used in like ice cream and other like food products, and it thickens it. So that's why we're using it for this. So it's really easy to buy online. Okay, so because I'm doing 2.5 liters and it's 5 grams for every liter, I'm doing 12.5 grams of methocel. And then I am putting that into the funnel, into the clean milk jug. Next, I'm going to put the lid on the milk jug, shake it really well, and let it sit overnight. And it is best to actually have it sit in the room you're going to marble in, because then it'll become room temperature of the room. And that's what we'll do best with the marbling process. An important part of marbling is selecting the correct paper. You really want to choose something that is 100% cotton. You don't want it to be too thick. And you also want to make sure that it's not shiny. So if it's shiny, that means it's been treated in the manufacturing process and it won't accept the paint well. And the reason you want it to be 100% cotton is that will help with the durability, because you're going to get this wet multiple times. So you want it to be able to withstand that and not rip. So what we need to do to the paper is we need to mort the paper. And that sounds like really weird, but all it is we're treating it so that it'll accept the paint. If you don't do this step and you marble it, the paint will just slide off the paper. So again, another waste of time. Start by marking the back of the paper you want to marble. So I'm just writing a B on mine. I'm starting with 20 sheets of paper. I need 10 for the book process that I'm doing. Plus I want some to like make mistakes, experiment with, and I think it'll be fun once we get started. So I want plenty of paper for that. To make the mixture to treat the paper, what you need to do is mix 1 teaspoon of alum powder with 1 cup of water. So mix it with a whisk in a bowl and mix it until all the alum powder is dissolved. For me, they were like tiny crystals, and it actually took a while, so I was doing other things, but just know it might take a second. put the paper in a cookie sheet, and then you're going to get a sponge nice and wet from the alum mixture, and you're going to wet the paper. You want to make sure the whole thing gets wet, because if you don't, those parts won't accept the paint. So make sure it's all wet. Hang the paper to dry, and it's going to depend on where you live and the weather with how long it's going to dry. It can go anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. And then once it's all the way dried, you're going to take it off the drying rack, and you are going to put it between 2 books so that it will dry nice and flat overnight. If you're not going to use the paper quickly, you need to store it in an airtight container. I am a little bit nervous to start marbling today because I feel like there's just so many scenarios where this can go wrong. If I didn't get the sizing right, if I didn't mordant the paper right, if I don't mix the paint right, it can all go wrong. But I am hoping I can get it to the point where it's fun, because that's where I want to be. I've never tried this before, but we're learning together. I've read 2 books on it. I've watched a million videos on it. So let's try. I am starting out by figuring out if I got my sizing right. My mixture ended up being too thin, and the way I could find out is I put paint in and I mixed it to the correct amount, and it would only sink. So my sizing needed to be thicker, and so I added just a bunch of the powder until I felt like it was thick enough, and I stirred it a bunch over an hour, and then that was the perfect thickness. To make sure I could give you a good ratio, I ended up remixing my whole bath, and it worked out that 3 tablespoons of the methyl cellulose with 3 liters of water was a great amount. One thing I will tell you is I don't think there's such thing as too much of the methyl cellulose. So it needs to be thick, but if it's too thick, it's not going to be a problem. So if you're like, I have to be precise, it's better to do more powder. Being precise isn't as important as getting it super thick, because the more thick it is, the more the paint will sit on top and the easier it'll be for you. Okay, so we are going to make a splatter brush, and all you need for this is an old broom, one of the ones that are made from straw, and I'm going to destroy mine. You could cut a few pieces here and there, but I just bought this for this, so I'm going to make a few of them. To make it, all you do is you put some wire around some of the pieces of straw, and then you start to cut them, and it's honestly a little bit tricky to cut them, but I kept cutting until I got everything that I wanted in the bundle. And then I added a second bit of wire around it. I'm just using floral wire because that's what I had on hand. Worked great. And so I have those 2 parts. And that makes the splatter brush. And one thing I didn't know was, like, how many of these do I need? Do I need one for each paint color? And I honestly wish I had made more. You can have just one and wash it out between each paint color. That works great, but since I don't have a sink nearby, it would have been nicer to just have a bunch of them and ruin the whole brush. So that's what I wish I would have done. And I have some linked in the description if you just want to buy one instead of make your own. So let me tell you about mixing the paint. So the paint I'm using is just acrylic paint I got from the craft store for like $1. And then I'm putting it into little cups from my kitchen. I actually suggest getting like little glass containers with lids on them, because then they'll store much easier, because I'm going to be marbling over a few days, so that'd be better. You mix the paint with some water, and that makes it thin enough that it'll sit on top of the surface. And you also need some ox gall, which I will link in the description, and that is what's going to make it spread out. So once your sizing is thick enough, you can start testing your paint and you can see how it does. So if it just sinks, you need to add more water. If it doesn't spread out enough, you need to add more ox gall. If it spreads out too much, then add more paint to it so that you have less ox gall. And I found, like, to start with 2 drops, and then I'd usually work up to like 4. And I'm using an eyedropper for this, which makes it a little more exact, which I really like. So once you have the paint working nicely, you're going to clean out the bath with a little piece of newspaper, and you're going to skim the surface. And what this does is it gets the paint off the top, and also sometimes the sizing forms like a skin on top and it won't accept the paint. So right before you add paint, you need to clean it off. And then you could add paint however you want. For this blue one, I'm just using my stylus to go back and forth, and that's a great way to do it. You could also use the combs we made, and I'm going to go over some of the patterns that you can create with marbling, and that's really fun to do. Once you have your pattern how you want it, you're going to put your paper onto the top of the bath, and then I am using a palette knife, and I'm just making sure the paper is touching the bath at all places, because if it's not touching, you won't get the paint up. And then you pull it up, and I'm putting it in a cookie sheet and just rinsing it off with water, because there's like some film on the top of this. It's called the sizing, and you want to get it off, and then I am drying it off to drip dry and put something underneath it because it's really messy. Okay, I thought I would go over some different variations that there are because this is really the fun part. You can move your stylus, your combs in different ways, and you create different iconic patterns. So I'm going to tell you my favorites. We have the floral pattern, and for this one you just use your stylus or the bottom of a paintbrush and you make swirls that go next to each other, and you kind of move it softly so that you kind of create a flower look. I tried the peacock a lot. It's my favorite look. I was mildly successful at it, but what you do is you use your fine tooth comb, so the ones that are like a ½ inch apart, where the nails are ½ inch apart, the closer the better, and you draw it through the water. And then you're going to use your peacock comb, that's the one with the nails on the diagonal, and you're going to pull it through, zigzag through the water, and it makes a peacock look. Next we have the snail pattern. For that one I like to use my fine tooth comb and kind of create swirls with it, and then pull the comb and then create another swirl, and it looks really cool. I really like how this one turned out. We have the fantasy pattern, and on this one you drop in your paint, and then all you do is you use your stylus, and I like to go back and forth with mine across the top. My son also tried this one, and he just it was like he was scribbling in the paint, and it kind of turned out cool. So you can have a lot of freedom with this one. Another really simple one is the comb pattern, and on this one all you do is you pull your comb through the paint. You can use the wide tooth, you can use the fine tooth, and then it just kind of creates that nice like marbly ripply look. One other thing I wanted to mention that I learned the hard way is that when you're pulling out the paper from the size bath, you should be scraping it against the side of the tray, and that is going to remove most of the size back into the water. That is really important because if you don't remove it, it gets too heavy and the edges can tend to rip, and also it takes way longer to dry if you have a ton of size like dripping off, which makes a big mess. Once you've marbled the paper, I like to hang mine up to dry, and then once it's totally dry, I put it under some books. I also put some scrap paper on them just so I didn't ruin my books. And one thing you want to make sure 100% sure is that they're totally dry. I had some size on some of them and they kind of like stuck together, and that acted like glue, which ruins your paper, so don't do that. My papers also, even though I put them under a book to dry, they ended up being really wrinkly, and I think number one, getting the size off better would have helped a lot, so I could have put them under the book earlier. And number two, I ended up ironing them, which worked pretty good. I'll be gluing these into a book, so I'm kind of hoping that during that process any last wrinkles will come out. We'll see, maybe it'll be a bigger problem, but I didn't have an amazing solution for getting the wrinkles out. So if you do, please let me know in the comments, because I want to get better at this because it's actually really fun. I thought I would show you how all the papers turned out. They are so good. Let me show you. Here's my thoughts on marbling. Number one, it is a craft. Like, people do this as a profession, and they have for thousands of years. And so there is a learning curve. But once you get the size in the bath right, and once you get the paint mix the right consistency, it's so fun. It's like, you never know how it's going to turn out. You can do so many different combinations, so many different colors, and you just don't know what you're going to get until you dip that paper in. It's very satisfying. So I loved it. Now that I know how to do it, I'm like, I want to do it. I want to try it again. I want to try to do some home decor with some marbled stuff on it. So for right now, the paper is a fun starting point, but I really liked it, and I think I'll be trying it again. So I also want you to come back, because next week I am going to be rebinding some of my favorite books I read as a kid. They're going to go from paperback books to hardcover books. I'm really excited about that. And these marbled papers will be used at the front and the back of the books as the end paper. So come back and you can see how these get used. If you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already, please subscribe.